Well, welcome back, everybody. I guess we're here except for Heather, and she'll probably be back, sometime along. And Michael will be coming. I didn't know, but what maybe we should go back through and try to pick out some highlights to give Michael some direction on Dan, myself, some direction on key issues that we're all interested in, and that we could maybe put together a list of issues from most important to least important. And then at our final meeting, we zero in on those and try to make it final, the list of things where we want to go and where we're trying to get to. So.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
You want to start short term?
Yeah. Okay, so we'll do short-term issues to start with, and if you do have some long-term, we'll put it on a separate sheet or further back on our sheet so we don't get them mixed up. Or if they're a combo of short and long, we can put them in either place. So.
Oh, is that perfect timing?
Yeah, we're just getting started. So we were gonna go through the list of things, Michael,
Okay.
and try to narrow it down to some extent. And Knife, you're gonna need certain things for the report, I'm sure that we're gonna all have to deal with. And so feel free to, ask any questions that you may have. So anybody wanna jump in and lead off? I think the transportation issue was certainly talked about by many of us as we presented. So we would make that an issue, would we? Or
I guess I would start off with transport with Heather's idea of tying infrastructure to broadening out the infrastructure support, and
get broader.
yeah, and figure out the tie that she described to climate and water quality as well, to see what program dollars we might be able to draw on, and whether that could also track to some efficiency, to broaden out even farther, so that you could make, as she suggested, fewer stops. If you had a bigger bulk tank and better access to cooling, then that might make it possible to have fewer stops. So if I understood her concept, was looking at infrastructure number one, for what that might constitute, driveways and bulk tanks and water tubs, and then keep going. So I put that on the table, and then the second is Jackie's idea of, along the same line, whether the state can have a bigger role in dealing with hauling costs. I would put those two together just to start the discussion.
any comment on lumping, making that a real broader area to include those 4 or 5 different things? What? No? But
I'm in agreement with putting those on the list.
well, then another issue, any particular suggestions from members for short term?
Well, what about paying for these, the risk management costs?
Yeah, I think
I don't know
that's,
whether,
that would be a risk man. What about the dairy protection program? Both of them?
right. I mean, basically analyze which either both or which ones work best, and how we can assist farmers to pay those costs if that is a limiting factor, or whether it's educating them better that there's a real opportunity there that they may be missing. I mean, I'm sure some of them may not be investing in it because of uncertainty or not fully understanding how it works, or all of those things. It's or just having a general antipathy to paying for insurance. Farmer, I know a lot of people don't like to pay for insurance because they sort of wonder, oh, you're putting money in and you never get paid for it until you have a catastrophe, and no one ever thinks they're going to have a catastrophe. I think that could be a very useful program.
Dan, Trevor.
I don't know if other people want to chime in, but I had a question for you, John, and anybody else, it appears that something on the order of 450 farms produce below the 5 million pound cap in the tier 1, and then there's 110 odd farms above it. So that raises Jackie's issue of number 1. But my question is more specific to begin with. It appears from FSA, we get numbers, it looks like 375 odd of the 450 farms are actually in DMC. So it's quite a few farms have joined, and they're in at the 950 level, which kind of surprised me. They've gone for the max at 15 cents a hundredweight, gone for it. So we're really, in some sense, only providing an incentive for that relatively smaller number of farms. So we're really more providing a rebate, if to the people that have produced it. And I think that's fine. It wouldn't be a rebate in the sense the farmer will not have to incur the cost. You're gonna take up the cost for what the farmer has paid anyway, and that's a good thing. It'll be offered across the board. But I'm wondering, we can do it for the last year of the program, offer it for the last year of the program, which is a year out. We can't get to it, I don't think, this year because it's closed for the year unless, right, Jackie, it's the application for DMC, I think, is closed. Well, it's certainly going to be closed before the legislature acts.
Yeah.
So
right, but why can't we rebate them for this year?
that's my question.
Oh, and then pay them for 2023. Then the other 110 might get in. And that's what I'd like to see. I'd still like to see something for the guys above the 5 million.
Okay, but reserve that for the moment. So
yes, okay, that's fine.
So if you would rebate for this year, but what do you do with the farms that didn't get in this year? Do you give them?
Well, you can't very well then say, okay, we're basically going to pay the we're going to
That's
pay
my
the
question.
insurance you would have received if you'd gone in. You know, I mean, I think we've got to have a starting point. I mean, my understanding, and I will absolutely admit I don't fully understand it because I'm not a dairy farmer anymore. But my understanding was that if listening to a farm credit presentation 2 or 3 months ago, that you're assessed this premium, but it's not due until the end of the year, if I've got this right. And if you get you get a payment, you actually, it's deducted from that. It's not sort of and it's only if you don't get a payment that you actually get a bill that you have
Is that
to.
the dairy margin coverage program or the farm credit is,
Well,
that's the other program?
Well, I'm sorry, Dan, this is where
Yeah, that's the dairy revenue protection program.
it may be that's the DRP program, and as I said, I don't fully know the details.
But I think even with that, the question remains, if you're going to rebate for 2022, how do you treat the 75 odd farms that didn't get in?
But I think if we're looking at covering costs, those farms that didn't get in didn't have the cost.
Oh.
This was a risk management decision that has been promoted and promoted and promoted by the co-ops and USDA. And, it's something that we hope they will take advantage of in 2023 by helping to pay for those premiums. I would love to help all farms, but it really would be quite unfair to pay people who didn't take the risk. And
Okay,
I would just
comfortable.
I would say rebate the ones that paid into the program, and hopefully the rest of them will get into it. I hate pitting farmers against farmer, but that was an obvious choice that some of them made to get into it, an obvious choice that some of them made not to get into it. And I don't think we can, I really would have a problem paying everybody because that really isn't fair.
Right.
So everybody, other people feel about that, because that's an open issue. Can line out what the program looks like and the cost for our next meeting, but it would help to know guidance from the rest of the task force on that issue.
See, the other issue, we as a state run on a fiscal year, and we've already assigned money for 22, the first half of 23. What we'll be working on next month is the budget for really the last half of 22, starting next July, and the first half of 23. So
I think if you could, in fiscal year budget 2023, you could rebate for the payments paid in 2022 and then cover the premiums to be paid in the calendar year 2023. And the cost would be about $1 million and change for the rebate and $1.5 million, assuming everybody signed up for the following. So the total cost somewhere 2.5 and change, something like that. I can, for the next meeting, I can line that out, but you could put that in the budget for the next year.
Randy?
I get a sense that not everybody here understands all of this. At least I have to confess that I don't.
I'm trying to, it's relatively straightforward.
Well,
so,
what is part of a larger picture here in terms of our solving a problem. And that is the complexity of the payment system of who pays who, what, and for what, and when. And as we talk about subsidizing the dairy industry in one way, shape, or form, which is really what we're talking about here.
Well, it's a partial. Yeah. It's a hedge that the federal government is making available.
Okay.
that we're trying to enable farmers to take better advantage of.
Okay.
So it's not a straight dollar for dollar subsidy in that sense.
Well, in a way, though, what I'm looking for is how do farmers get paid?
Yeah.
And but directly and indirectly.
Yeah.
And how are their costs reduced by things that government does? And it would be great to have a single piece of paper
Good.
that outlines this in graphic form so that you can actually see it and visualize it, because we get tied up in the complexity, and there's always a but this and if that, and it becomes it's like trying to grapple with a pile of jello.
I certainly take your point.
Yeah.
On this one, I think it's not quite as, because this is more what started as a pretty straightforward market response to a volatile commodity market with a hedging program.
Mhm.
So you take the government out of it, the marketplace, the co-op said, let's set up a hedging program. Let's help producers hedge against the uncertainty. And the market responded with programs that the government had no involvement with. And so, in a regular business environment, it's a hedge. What the federal government did was establish a hedging program as a government program, and that's the dairy margin coverage program. It's really a hedging rather than a subsidy, because the farmers have to pay a premium and an administrative fee to cover the administrative costs. But where it gets gelatinous, as it were, is that the government is acting as the insurance company instead of the marketplace stepping in with an insurance company. But other than that, Randy, it's pretty straightforward. A hedge. You pay 15 cents a hundredweight, and you have some different coverage rates you can take. Not too complicated. And you take the risk. You pay your 15 cents or your 5 cents for less coverage. And if the market comes under the hedge, you lose. If the market goes over the hedge, you win. And it's paid out $1.50 on average for 3 years. So it's real money. And the market hasn't covered that through an actuarial insurance. The federal government's paid it through the Farm Bill. But what we're proposing to do is to have the state step in and absorb the premium costs for the farmers. And as Jack,
where does the state get the money to do that?
you'll vote for it.
Okay, but you're talking about an increase in general fund expense.
Absolutely.
Or get it out of the federal infrastructure money.
Well, that again is one of my questions about the things that we're talking about, is clarity regarding what we can use both COVID money for that we already have, and there's probably a great deal of uncertainty about what we can use federal infrastructure money for. And whether this constitutes infrastructure, I would have a big question mark.
But I would say the first question is it worth the state to pick it up? So 15 cents gets you $1.50. And that's your return.
So instead of
Absolutely.
18, it would automatically be 19.50 going to the farmer, right? If it averaged out at 18.
Right.
And again, there are a lot of ifs there, as you know. But I understand the return on investment, which is being paid for by the feds. That makes sense. The state's ability to, and there's a lot of resistance, I think, at least in parts of the legislature, not to increase general fund expense at this point, because eventually all this federal money is going to go away. And if we wind up stuck with something
This is
pre-pandemic,
2-year.
This would just be for
2 year.
through the Farm Bill. And then the Farm Bill is going to redo the program. They have to see where you are. So it would have a built-in sunset to it. But may I make a suggestion? With this information, I can provide some more. Mike and I can put together a information sheet we're gonna stay out of the pricing side, but we can deal with the hedging and lay it out, because it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Well, the national milk producers have a fact sheet that I'm looking at right here. It's basically all your questions answered.
Good.
Yeah, this one is pretty straightforward. I hesitate to say that about milk pricing,
Yeah.
but this one is actually pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and I'm talking about the larger issue, not just solely this narrow issue.
Sure. Sure, absolutely.
Could I also add though, but Senator Brock, I appreciate your comments because, you know, we're always looking at the budget. But I think to the point that was made earlier, for a $1.6 million investment, you get back $18 million. That does not stay in the dairy farmer's pocket.
Mhm.
That goes back into the general economy of the state of Vermont. So if you're looking at making an investment like that, we really need to promote the fact that that money is not sticking in the bank. It's not staying in any farmer's pocket. That's going back to pay their bills, to hire labor, to do whatever they need to do to keep their business going. So it's an investment. It is an investment of $1 or $2 million over 2 years. But if you're thinking that you might get $18,000 to $40,000 back, $18 to $40 million back, that's a huge assist to the bottom line of the general fund in the state of Vermont. So I just want to put that out there on
That's a
behalf
good
of the
point. It's
farmer
new money into the state.
Yeah.
It's new money
Right.
into the state.
Right.
And Jackie, so we can maybe move on to other, we can scope out the cost. The bigger farms, your cap tier 1 at 5 million, and the bigger farms that come in basically at the lower rate for the most part. So we could look at what that would cost and return and provide those two alternatives.
Thank
We
you.
can do that. Yep.
So we should move on. We'll work on both of those, hedging as well as the dairy margin protection program,
Both programs, we'll line
Yeah.
both out.
both programs. Next issue, anybody got suggestions? We talked about Randy's issue of a Vermont products at the distributors level. And using that to do more promotion maybe, and would you like to put that on the list?
Is there already an assessment
There was already a promotional assessment, yes.
done?
On farmers, right?
Right, it's on the farmer,
On the farmer,
taken
but
out of
not,
the milk check.
that usually goes to New England dairy promotion.
Isn't that the checkoff?
Yeah.
Goes to national
But
first
the-
and then region.
Yeah, then it gets funneled back.
That's the farmer checkoff. The state hasn't passed something along the lines of what Randy's talking about.
No subsidy.
No, not no, to the extent that Senator Brock is talking about. There's one on meat, on beef.
Yeah, they have a checkoff.
Right.
But that's still on the
Yeah,
farm.
that's a checkoff on the farmer too. Yep. Okay, not just a question. Yep.
No, I haven't. We talked about, in ag, this last session, we talked a little bit about a tax like this, but it was collected at the store. And we couldn't
Maybe that's the bill I saw.
figure out how because it comes in all different sizes and dairy products and,
Yeah.
from cheeses up
Yeah,
through.
mine was solely focused on fluid milk. It's
And
it's
all,
simpler, it's
anything
more
that,
direct. And more is it.
any container that had milk on it
Mhm.
would fall in under.
Yeah, and use a flat rate, regardless of the container, regardless of the size of the container.
So that's essentially what Maine does.
Yeah, what is there?
It's a user fee.
Correct.
And it's assessed on the first handler that handles the milk that will be put in the
Right, and I
store.
think
So
that's a
that doesn't
better
happen.
approach,
That's the
obviously,
way it's
than
done.
doing it the retailer, because I think Mike is right there.
Yeah.
Could I just make a comment though about the Maine program? To the point that they do collect that, but to balance that, the money comes out of the general fund. And I wasn't sure from their presentation how much of that 16 million that they paid out this past year to their 220 odd farmers actually came from the tax as opposed to coming out of the general fund to make that whole. So before we go too far down that rabbit hole, I would really like to have a better grasp of what they're subsidizing out of the general fund. Because to your point, Senator Brock, you know, we start doing little piece here and a little piece there, it could add up.
Well, one
So
of the things, though, that I think is important, and Michael and I had that discussion during the break, is we just have to make sure, as I put in there with strictures, is that we don't run afoul of interstate commerce issues, and we don't run afoul of disadvantaging producers out of state by having a direct subsidy. And Michael suggested, I think that's right, that the payment probably should come out of the general fund, and that this fee should go into the general fund. Now, once it's in the general fund, then the legislature can do anything it wants, and there's the clarity. Now, some would say, well, it's a it's a wink and a nod. It is and it isn't. But that, I think, is one of the things that we would have to have put in place just to make sure that this is doable.
Well, that's what Maine has done, like Jackie's saying, it goes into the general
fund.
fund, and then it washes around in the general fund, and then it comes out. And like Jackie says, there isn't, in a given year, there isn't enough that went in to pay what came out.
right.
So they have to make up the difference with other revenues. So that's they're a little, the numbers are available, but not easy to get because it changes year to year. But the other piece of the equation, Senator Brock, is that for the fluid milk, you're only talking 5% of the production.
Right.
So you're relatively small. What's going to go in isn't going to fund much by way of what could come out as a payment to producers. So
the key is, in terms of being able to tax something to distributor level, it's got to be stuff that's sold in Vermont.
yeah, I don't think you have an interstate commerce issue with what you're proposing to do.
No, we don't. That's the whole point.
Particularly if you use it for promotion. I think if you pay it out to producers, then it whether the going in and coming out, Maine survived the court test, but it never got too far. So there is an open-ended issue as to whether it would survive. But I think the larger issue is that if you produce 2.7 billion pounds of milk, which is what we produce, 10% of that is 270 million pounds of milk, which is 2.7 million hundredweight there. And then 5 cents against that raises $135,000.
Yeah.
So it's not gonna, against the 2.7 billion pounds of milk, it doesn't pay very much. That's the problem. But it would be a good source of promotion money. And that would be, you could leverage that to expand your sales like you're talking about in Vermont for local and for targeted advertising, like Heather said, Vermont is a brand that people want to buy, and we need to do a better job to advance that. And it seems to me that Vermonters would really support that idea.
I think they would.
So it's, I would propose that as a friendly amendment to your suggestion, that it be that in that amount for that purpose, rather than to think about it as a producer, because it's just not enough to really, but you could really get some bang for your buck for advertising.
Promotion, that'd be good.
So what do you think?
I think what I want to think more about is, other than fluid milk, how to reach a larger, but again, when you're only taxing stuff that's coming into Vermont, that's where the problem lies, as opposed to what's being produced in Vermont.
Correct. That is.
Because you can't add the tax to stuff that's going to go out of state, because you're competing with other states that don't have it. And so immediately that's a non-starter.
Well, I think that's the longer term issue. Is it a non-starter? You know, is it necessarily a non-starter? And we, at least with Ben and Jerry's, they're paying now with the Caring Dairy program that we heard about. So it's a starter. You know, they decided that they can market, and it's really, you know, I thought Heather put it very well, that there is recognition to the Vermont brand for its adherence to higher quality regulations and better performance, and that's worth something in the marketplace.
I think that is worth something in the marketplace to products that are defined as Vermont products.
Yeah.
As you talk about the large amount of fluid milk, though, that goes outside of Vermont and is commingled with milk from New York, New Hampshire, and where else, and then is packaged as ABC milk. It is not Vermont milk at that point. And I don't know that it's going to be in large enough quantities to make a difference. On the other hand, packaging Vermont milk that has Vermont milk as a label on it, that may be sold as a elite product, if you will, a prestige product, or a niche product in other areas, because you can advertise and otherwise promote it as something that has real value. That's a separate issue. It's that kind of issue where advertising money that would go not just in Vermont, but to selected markets in which you're trying to push that product. That is something that perhaps we ought to think about.
Well, so, and I food for thought, and this is, I think, in the longer term, right along the lines of what you're talking about, that the amount of milk at this point from Vermont that's going out of state as, you know, fluid, liquid product to go to Boston to be turned in, commingled with New York milk or New Hampshire milk, is there isn't a whole lot of it left. Most of what is being produced in Vermont is going into the products you're talking about. I mean, Rick Smith put up that list of products that it was quite remarkable that are all those are manufactured products, and they're manufactured right here in Vermont for the most part. And then you add Cabot to the mix, and you add Commonwealth Dairy to the mix, and you're over half of the milk product in Vermont is just what you're talking about. And so whether we can try to get some of the value of those products that those companies are seeing when they sell them back to the farm, you know, that's the thought. That's
I agree with
the
that.
longer term.
Well, if we have that promotion money, we could even promote the sale of these products, you know, where they're utilized and used.
In Texas. I mean,
yeah. John, do you have a question or?
Just a couple thoughts here. One, I was wondering, besides promotion, could say the revenue from Randy's various tax proposals, could it be used, say, in the agency to hire an ombudsman, or could it be used as like a retirement succession apprenticeship endowment? Or does that need specific legislative nudging at the agency?
so you know, you don't want to get involved in interstate commerce problems. So if you assess this milk on the sales of the product here in Vermont and then use it for completely in-state purposes, there's no interstate commerce problem. So at that point, you can use the money for whatever purpose you want with that revenue stream and target it as a dedicated assessment too. And you can pick your, you know, you can use it for, so we should decide, you know, so you're suggesting an alternative use of that amount of funds. So that's
With that small amount of money though, you can only divide it.
that's right. I think we'd have to pick from the options. So we could identify the options and then pick. So
We might be making $20 container tax on it and solve the problem.
then people will drink more oat milk.
No, that's included.
There you go.
So
Heather, did you have your hand up or?
Bobby,
Did,
I had a question for Heather, actually. In that, I mean, it's interesting that we've seen, you know, humanely raised as a marketing certification. So I wonder, Heather might know this, is there a third party that does certification for essentially like good for the earth farming? So it would recognize the work our farmers have done with soils. So if Vermont is way ahead of the rest of the country on this, it seems like there's a competitive market advantage we'd have if you're the consumer and you pick this up and you see it's this milk was you know, made by farms that are good for the earth, or you know, that are doing the hard work of making our soils better, and perhaps also humanely raising their cows. So I didn't know if they probably exist out there, but that seems like for Vermont,
I mean,
especially somewhere we can go.
I think people are saturated with labels. You know, I bought something the other day and there were at least 5 or 6 different labels on it. And it was so fascinating to me. I'm not sure if people have the bandwidth for yet like another label, but there are third-party certifications out there for almost everything, John. So, and like those coming on board at rapid pace, even especially around carbon and climate and regenerative ag. But you know, room in the marketplace for yet another label, like I guess I don't really see that. I was sort of thinking, especially in a short term, like a broader based marketing campaign that just states simply what we already know, that we don't need, you know, a third party to certify. Like, we're not saying that the farmers have the most carbon in their soil of all farmers in the country. We're, you know, simply saying these farmers, you know, farm to a standard that's set in law in Vermont. So, you know, people can't really refute that. That's what farmers are doing. And all farmers, you know, are doing that, not just dairy farmers. And I think, you know, that kind of marketing hopefully helps everybody in Vermont, you know. So that's a lot of kind of what I've been thinking about. And even with this whole payment for ecosystem services, which is super complicated. Not sure how fast we're going to get, you know, out the door with something like that. But there's already things we already know. It's not really going to cost us any money to get more information. It'll cost money to figure out the best way to promote what we already know. But, you know, that information's already there. And I think it's really telling, you know. We're not greenwashing. We're certainly just stating what farmers are already doing, because Vermont cares about, you know, the environment, you know, and, you know, the health of communities and the health of their farmers, you know. So I guess that's what I was thinking about with the marketing. And then you know, with I don't know if it's a tax or, because nobody likes that word, but I guess you know, it brought me back to the conversation around Horizon and Danone sort of pulling out of the Northeast for business reasons, you know, none maybe that we can argue with. They're a business and they're trying to figure out what works best for them, like we all do with our businesses. You know, it's really unfortunate, but they're still going to sell product in our state that doesn't even come from farms here. And that's a huge loss to us. And we're just allowing them to come back in our state and sell products, maybe at a lower price than what our farms can sell products for. And I guess that's what made me start thinking about, you know, is there a cost to that? And I, you know, there's probably some legal things I know nothing about, but it seemed to me that nickel on every dairy product that's sold in Vermont that's not, you know, from here, one way or the other, goes back to our farms one way or the other. Maybe not in a direct payment, but through these grant programs, through business planning, through all the different services that we never have enough money for, and different opportunities. And I guess, you know, that's what I was thinking about from a fee of some type. Anyway,
Yeah, you all set?
yep, I'm set now. You can shut me down.
Hang in there, Heather. We do have a guest with us and has had her hand up.
Just a couple times, thank you.
Would you like to?
Sure. Hi, my name's Amy Richardson. I'm a dairy farmer from Heartland, Vermont with my family. I know most of the folks there. I was just gonna make a comment about third-party audit program. So it's a project of the National Milk Producers Federation called FARM. Maybe you've heard about it already. Farmers Assuring Responsible Management. And some parallels to the Caring Dairy program, as far as I understand, although I think perhaps even more comprehensive in terms of an animal care component, a workforce component, an environmental stewardship component. And as Agrimark members, we're required to participate in the FARM program. So I do think that there's, you know, possible marketing angles with the fact that many, if not, well, many dairy farmers in Vermont would be participating in some program like this already. Yeah, so I have some opinions about, you know, this really deep drilling on our Vermont brand. I think it's pretty difficult to see the light at the end of that tunnel, so to speak. I sit on the Vermont Dairy Promotion Council, and I'm also a delegate for the co-op with New England Dairy. And so there's a lot of value in trying to be inclusive to our regional neighbors at the same time that we're trying to figure out how to survive and be viable as a Vermont dairy industry too. So I don't have the answers,
Yeah, well,
but I appreciate being here. Thank you.
yeah, well,
Thank you.
glad you are here.
Yeah, thanks.
So, are we pretty well squared away? Jackie, do you have any?
No, I thank you, Amy, for mentioning that, because I was going to too, that there is a marketing tool and it is called the FARM program, because you can't ship milk from, I think, either DFA or Agrimark without going through that program and being audited. And we're not using it as a marketing tool. And every year they update it. I think this year they're updating it regarding farm labor housing, but it's a pretty extensive audit, and it takes a long time to go through, and it can cost money for farmers. And I don't think that they're getting the marketing out of it that they should. And it might address some of the things that Heather and Representative O'Brien are talking about, in that, yes, we're already doing this. Yes, we've paid to do this because we have to ship our milk to do this. It's what Walmart requires. It's what Publix requires. And so that would be wonderful to have some money to put towards marketing that. So thank you, Amy, for mentioning that. The other short-term thing I was just looking at was, we talked about BGS and getting them, finding out why they can or cannot buy local milk or put it into institutions. And I would like to put that as a short-term. We didn't have them in. I guess none of us thought to do that at the time, but it seems like a good way to go and ask them. Probably maybe offline, Danny or Senator Starr or Michael can get in touch with them and find out what the challenge is for them to buy local products, and how we can help them do that. I think that could be a possible short-term challenge that we can look at somewhere.
Dan?
I second that, but I'd like to add Bobby's bundle into that the issue of school lunch, local. It's not that the legislature hasn't spent time on this, but it seems ripe to do it again with some more focus. Where is the school lunch milk coming from, and is there some way to advance the idea of Vermont milk being used for the Vermont school lunch program?
John?
But I just wanted to, because I understand there, a lot of the school lunch program is subsidized by USDA, and they have some, they will not allow, for example, whole milk or chocolate milk, even though the science shows that neither of those products they're a positive product rather than a detrimental product. So I just don't know. I mean, I'm just curious as to how much is federal mandated and how
So
much
we'll try to sort that out, and I'd like to pick up on that a little bit. And in part, what Heather talked about before, that we heard the testimony from New England Dairy about the new product innovation and development in the fluid milk business, and whether there's some basis for Vermont to be involved in getting out on the leading edge of new fluid products that kids would be interested in drinking in schools. Not just whole milk versus skim, but some of the products that New England Dairy talked about being made available to kids, because that's where they learn how to drink milk, and see if there's a way to get those more innovative products into the schools, and hopefully the kids will drink them.
Could I make a comment?
Sure.
Just to push back on you a tiny bit, John Roberts. There's definitely flavored milk options available in school districts.
There are.
Yep, in general, some districts disallow flavored milk, but others definitely accept it. Usually the school milk formulation is specific in terms of sugar content and fat content, right? And New England Dairy is definitely the pro on that type of information. As far as innovative packaging and serving options, one thing that has gained a lot of popularity and has seen good success in districts around the region, including Vermont, is bulk milk dispensers. So instead of paper cartons or plastic bottles, and Thomas Dairy used to be a supplier of this opportunity with like a 5-gallon bag of milk, and then you have a bulk dispenser with reusable cups. So something like that is like somewhat simple, but actually innovative enough that students do really well with that.
Well, you're making me feel old, because that's what I drank when I was a kid.
Well, it's kind of what comes around goes around a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's new milk in old bottles.
Right.
Yeah.
And one other thing I wanted to say as far as school meals, you had mentioned lunch versus breakfast.
Yes.
And I think New England Dairy folks would tell you that there's an opportunity for more dairy product consumption with school breakfast
Is that right?
versus lunch.
Yeah, I think when we talk school lunch at this point, we're really bundling together breakfast and lunch.
Yeah.
It's just a shorthand.
Yeah.
Yeah, for nutrition programs in the schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're good on that. Are we?
Yeah, Bobby.
Oh, Michael.
Going back to the marketing aspect, and I agree with Heather wholeheartedly, and I know my committee does, that we need to market. But are we talking about raising dollars, if we do, to provide monies to the state to do the marketing, or is it to provide
Good question.
other entities that are already marketing to provide more marketing? Now, if we're talking about the state, we've had a lot of discussions with tourism and marketing at the Agency of Commerce. And what they're doing is we look at it as an umbrella. And so the state is the overarching. So the state is providing marketing outside the state to promote the state in a non-descriptive way, so that we're not looking at one company or one business, that we're saying this is Vermont, here is Vermont, and you'll see a farm, you'll see ski areas, you'll see communities and small quaint villages and things like that. If that's what we're looking at, then we need to decide what we are looking at, I think, as far as what we're talking about marketing. But I want to make sure that, I want to caution everyone too, that before we start really pushing a promotion, we've got to figure this labor issue out. Because if we can't provide the products that are being promoted, then we're defeating our own purpose. So I think there is a short term and a long term as far as marketing goes. And you know, when we talk about the issues that Cabot's having, being able to put more product out, or unable to put more product out because of labor issues, I think we've got to be cautious of how much we're doing in promotion too.
Yeah, we don't want to be promoting something we can't deliver.
Right.
Well, that's a sad tale right there.
It is.
That's a sad tale.
Any, Jackie?
Yes, just to build, thank you, to build on Representative Marcotte. You know, when this group first started, it was Joe Bradley, I remembered saying, we got to come up with some big outside of the box idea. Why do we keep going back to the Agency of Agriculture to market when we have a tourism department that should be doing that for us? I think that's, no offense to the Agency of Agriculture or to New England Dairy Promotion or anybody, but we're paying a pretty big agency to market Vermont, and we're talking about marketing Vermont dairy products. You know, we've got Tillamook cheese coming in. We've got Happy Cows from California. Our Agency of Commerce should be marketing on our behalf. And I just think that's kind of an out of the box way to think about it. Thanks.
I do way more that way.
Yeah, I would agree, but I think we need to realize too that the Agency of Commerce in the Tourism and Marketing Division has a very small budget, about 3.5 million. And although my committee continues to push and push and push, there's other committees in the House that don't see that as money well spent. And so that's kind of what we're up against too. So
Partner them. I think that's why I've always looked at trying to have the ag committees look at commerce as a partner, because we are businesses. And, you know, if we put this tax or whatever we're going to call it on milk for marketing, we could focus that into ACCD and help them leverage other funds, perhaps through the Agency of Ag or whatever. But you know, I just think we need to think a little bit more about how we're using our marketing dollars, and maybe we're not in the right spot within state government. Just a thought.
yeah, no, I agree with you, Jackie.
Yeah.
It's a good thought.
If it helps, they call it a handler fee in Maine. It's the handler of first resort. So it's a handler fee as opposed to a tax.
Okay, are we all set to move on? Other issues that we want to be sure and get on the list?
Well, I think Representative Marcotte just raised the labor issue. So it seems like we ought to put that on the table and see what we want to propose. So.
And I think that, you know, Bobby brought up the transportation issue, and you know, when we look at CDLs, there's programs out there already, and I think we need to understand what programs the Department of Labor has,
Yeah.
and how can, say, DFA or Agrimark, or even the farmers, if they want to provide their own trucking, how can they access those programs to train someone to get a CDL? And if there's impediments there, what do we need to do to make those changes? Can we, can we statutorily make some changes so that they can access those programs if they can't now?
So is that's something that we could do internally though, as a committee or
Yep.
a joint committee or between, is that something that we would want to put?
I think it is, because that's pretty straightforward testimony that that's an issue of
Oh, it's a
concern.
major
So
issue.
it's a finding that that's something that should be done by the two committees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we would put that in. And what about tying our housing requests to Vermont Housing in areas like where we have a real labor problem, so that there is housing available for people if they move to remote Cabot, Vermont to work there. They haven't got to drive 50 or 75 miles to find a place to live. So I'm wondering if we could tie housing with labor, because we do that on farms with the farm labor housing issue. Actually, we set up, like Gus Seelick over in VHCB has money specifically to help farm labor housing, to improve the housing, to even build new if they absolutely need to attract help on the farm. So,
Yeah, I think we need to really concentrate on, we're looking at senior housing all the time. We look at low income housing. We really need to concentrate on worker housing, affordable worker housing. I think we don't talk about that a lot. I think it's probably being done.
well,
And it's not only looking at housing for not just apartments, but looking at how do we create communities where there's affordable homes that people can buy that work in, say, Cabot or another manufacturer, so that we're creating these communities too, that people want to own something. They don't want to just spend their money on apartments and not realize a return on that. So I think there's opportunity for us to be able to look at those areas that, in Cabot and Middlebury and other places around the state where there's a need for expanded workforce.
well, you talk about history repeating itself. Years back, every mill town always had rows and rows of housing for the mill workers, that, individual houses. And a lot of them are still standing today. And, we got away from that, and now we're getting back to it.
Well, I've got a bill that is being introduced this time that's focused on housing and affordable housing. And it does a number of things. It's still under development, it's still being drafted right now, but it focuses on priority housing projects not being solely in so-called urban areas or concentrated areas or areas that exist right now, but focused in terms of subsidy in areas in which unemployment is higher on a countywide basis than it is elsewhere in the state, or high unemployment areas. It focuses on reducing the amount of time permitting takes. It focuses on the appeals process, because so often we have the appeals process in which one or two people slow things down forever, and we have an increasing amount of time to deal with appeals in the environmental court. So it provides some one-time funding out of COVID money to bolster the environmental court, at least as long as we have federal funds, in order to speed up the timing of these processes. And there are a whole bunch of other things in this bill that's focused on dealing with this whole affordable housing crisis issue. And it's a real crisis.
Jackie and then John.
Thank you. You know, I live in Cabot. You're making me feel like I'm in a third world country up there. I just wanted to say one other thing that the Creamery has been running into, and they went to the Cabot school and asked them to go into a public-private partnership about childcare. So, you know, I think that's something worth looking at too. If you're going to start looking at clusters of middle income affordable housing, if you're putting it around our schools which are suffering, this seems to be a good way to add that component to the labor shortage, because as Representative Marcotte said, a lot of them are women that can't go back to work because they don't have childcare. Let's pull in the schools. I know, you know, we're kind of casting a wide net here, but if we're looking at everything that the labor force needs to come back, that is one of the pieces. So I would just throw that out there. Thank you.
And John.
Jackie lives in Cab, Botswana. I was thinking back on the transportation issue. Did we ever hear if, I'm sure they're competitive, but is there any reason if I get my CDL that I won't go work for FedEx or V-Trans rather than get into hauling milk? So is there anything we can do at a legislative level to sweeten CDL drivers going into dairy transportation?
I know, no, I don't know if you could do that or not, because you get the same training whether you're going to drive tractor trailer for UPS or haul milk for DFA. I don't know if you, I suppose through a grant program, you could specify you aren't going to get the grant program unless you were interested in driving milk truck or something like that. I don't know how that would work. Do you deal with questions like that, Michael?
I don't see a way of doing that. I think, I mean, when we create training programs, we want to make sure that the training is you're able to use it either here or there or wherever you go. It's an investment that the state makes into the person, not into the company. And so I think the big issue in dairy transportation for truck drivers is, you know, the ruralness of the state, long drives between stops, the difficulty in the wintertime, and it's a 24/7, 365-day a year issue. So if they can get enough drivers that you know, people can work a 5-day week, 5-day work week, and not have to worry. And you know, you're going to have people that are okay with working weekends, and there's others that aren't. If you can, but it takes a mass of people to be able to do that, and we don't have that.
Well, and one thing about picking up milk or being a milk tank driver, you got to know how to put tire chains on.
Yeah.
And UPS guys don't know what tire chains even are. The other, you know, history tells us a lot, and always, forever, farm boys that grew up on the farm, and they usually had, most farm families had several members to the family or children. They all didn't want to farm, and they made excellent truck drivers with very, very little training. I mean, they've been driving tractors around the farm and farm trucks, and we, we don't have that anymore. We don't have those young guys and young women coming off the farms that already are half trained. And they just need a finishing school to help them get in the cab and go. The other thing with that issue, a lot of insurance companies now won't insure your vehicle if your driver hasn't had a couple of 3 years experience. So, I mean, you run up against all kinds of problems of once you get somebody trained, they still may not be able to drive a milk truck because they haven't had any experience. And so, Dan?
Can I suggest that we try to shape a program for training milk hauling drivers? Take your point that you're creating a general training program, but there's specifics, like you said, to milk, and try to shape it and see what comes out of that for potential incentives that could be responsive to dairy. Like you're saying, the 24/7 means, and we heard that in the testimony, that attracting people to DFA, that's a problem for them. And so whether there's some way to incentivize that specific issue, so try to tease out the issues and then see if we can tailor a program. Suggest that. And I think similarly for promotion, to your and Jackie's point, if the idea is to steer, we have a potential pot of money that we might be able to steer to the Agency of Commerce for the purpose of promoting dairy products, then we're trying to do a tailored promotion program rather than just give the money to tourism and say, here, promote dairy. It's a dairy program that this task force is trying to establish. So we tailor it to dairy in each piece. Maybe we can come up with some incentives along the lines of what John is talking about.
So could I, following up on that point, DFA was already issuing hiring bonuses for CDL drivers at one point. So if you create a program around going to DOL or the trainer that DOL uses, they get trained as a milk truck driver, then they get an extra hiring bonus when they come out of that program if they're hired on by DFA or Agrimark. And then DFA can offer their own hiring bonus at that point as well. So it will drive, it won't guarantee, but it will drive them towards working for as a milk truck driver.
That's the idea. Yep.
Okay.
One addition, which is I'm sorry, John, if I just, on the labor side, I think John raised the idea of some kind of apprenticeship program. And Lee, of course, spoke to a program that I couldn't quite track, was out of Maine, but that he was able to take advantage of. So it seems to me we ought to follow up. So we have the housing and childcare issues for workers in factories, and there's clear labor problem on farms, and we should be thinking about that. So an apprenticeship program seems like a good complement so that we're addressing labor across the industry.
Danny, I think that program that Leon spoke about, it was the Vermont Grazing Apprenticeship program. It wasn't out of Maine, it's here in the state of Vermont, but it focused on grazing practices. But certainly if we were going to look at something like that, that might be a prototype for an apprenticeship program that seems to be working pretty well.
So that sounds good. So if we can look into that, Mike, as grazing as a potential prototype.
Can everyone stay a few more minutes? I know some have meetings at 1 o'clock, so we need to give people, a little bit of time for lunch. Stay another 10 or 15 minutes. Yep. Okay.
John's got his hand up.
John?
Another CDL question is, I was wondering if, do migrant farm workers have the ability to get a Vermont driver's license?
Yes.
Could they also get a CDL?
I doubt it.
Is it federal?
You have to be able to get a CDL. It's good for all 50 states. And we had to do special licensing provisions to even get them a Vermont license. Because they aren't citizens, they aren't, a lot of them aren't here legally.
Right. No, I was just wondering if that might be an avenue for us to, if you can get a Vermont license.
An immigrant that's here legally could get a CDL.
The federal government allows that?
Yeah, if you're here as a legal visitor or whatever, and you reside here, you could get because I know some of the larger companies, that's who they have driving their trucks. They bring people in legally and get them licensed up and they drive.
I mean, be interesting exploring, given that if we don't really care where good drivers come from, as long as we get good drivers for the dairy industry.
Right. Yeah. Other issues?
So if people have other short term, otherwise maybe we can spend a couple minutes on the final minutes on the long term.
Yeah, well, we need to, yeah.
Thoughts. I guess on the question of what to do with the milk, all this milk that's being used in state, I think where we are is needing to have some more analysis, like I said before. So if the task force is of a mind to direct further inquiry into, I think it's now pretty well established that that's the configuration of the industry. That we have a lot of milk that's being used in state for purpose of sales out of state, and what is the legal consequence of that? And so if the task force would direct further inquiry into that, both from a legal standpoint and a functional standpoint, to Randy's point, I think you don't want to pressure an in-state business, that's an issue, and then the legal question. So that would be my suggestion, that we're not in a position to make a presentation to the legislature of what we can do with the milk, because we have some more questions that need to be answered, and we should pursue that inquiry.
Well, I don't see how we can move ahead without getting a third party, say, looking at that was disinterested. So I would certainly support getting that question answered. So if we wanted to move ahead, we could, or if we find out that we can't, well, why spend time dealing with it and then finding out we can't do anything with it anyway, so.
So
Are
probably.
you talking about going back through the Department of Financial Regulation, or are you talking about something else?
Well, I think you probably are, it sounds like you're talking about putting something together where you hire a consultant to look at what we're talking, what do we want them to look at?
Whether you can assess a fee on product that's made here, that's shipped.
But we'd have, you got to put the parameters around it. And then I think you can put it through DFR, let them hire that consultant. Because they've done that. We've had it last year in the last session. We asked them to go out and hire consultants to look at some issues with unemployment and other things. So they're familiar with the report that they have already come up with us, or you can have ag do it. But
Well, I think have ledge council do it, because it's a Commerce Clause question ultimately of legislative authority. So it's really the institutional capability of the legislature. We did this with the dairy compact and it worked really well. We hired a Harvard Law professor to assess the Commerce Clause question of setting up the compact, and then we had that, you know, available as a resource, and it stayed to home with the legislature. So
Makes sense.
We can do it. I do the contracting for consultants all summer long, so. That'd be good.
Yeah, it doesn't- I don't think it matters where it's housed, just as long as somebody has the ability to do that.
Well, I think you'd feel better if we did it right
I think it would be,
quicker and.
especially if it's under a certain dollar amount, we could probably go out and just target a couple of people and just hire them. If it's gonna be, I think it's over 100,000, we probably have to go to a bid. But if it's under 100,000, we can just do very quick.
Something like
process.
this shouldn't be that,
don't think so. I think
that expensive. I mean, if you get a constitutional lawyer or professor.
I've been, you know, to your point, I've been trying to frame the issue, and it's pretty straightforward. So hopefully it can not be a complicated constitutional question.
Good. Is there money within the budget now in this year's budget that could be used? Or would we need to do something in budget adjustment to allow it to happen?
Depending on what the amount is, I think you probably could get approval from the pro tem and the speaker to spend up to a certain amount of money.
Yeah, it wouldn't have to be, I don't think, a lot.
Right.
And I mean, there's money there
Yeah.
to do it with, so.
So it sounds like the task force is in support of going forward along those lines.
Yeah, at least we get an answer whether we can go there. John?
I certainly support the idea of answering the question, can we, do we have any authority? Does the state have any authority over that milk? I must admit, Dan, I get a little nervous when you say the milk is used, 60%, 70% is used in the state of Vermont, because it just worries me a little that it isn't actually, it's processed, but the whole sale takes place outside the state.
Well, the utilization is in state. The sale of the milk from DFA to Ben and Jerry's is in state now. You know, it used to, St. Albans sold that milk to Westland Creamery in Lynn, Massachusetts. The transaction was in Lynn, Massachusetts, and the use of the milk was in Lynn, Massachusetts. Now, that milk that used to go to Lynn is being used by Ben and Jerry's in the state of Vermont
Well,
to make a product that's sold out of the state of Vermont.
Yeah, I didn't mean, to me, it's just a semantics. It's not a big deal.
But it's the term, you know, and it's the utilization.
But I think it would be good to know,
Yeah,
as part of the process of inquiry, you know, what the actual status, so to speak, of that
Yeah.
milk is in
Yeah.
interstate commerce. Do we have any authority to do anything? Then whether we exercise any authority, that's a whole different argument.
yeah, I mean, there's no need of us spinning our wheels if we can't go anywhere. So we should have that knowledge, and I'll speak with Becca on our side, and Michael and John could speak with, you know, for Jill on the health side. So, other,
Yeah, I think that just raises the question of some kind of assessment of the possibility of either expanding existing capacity or building a new plant. And I think it's some kind of a feasibility assessment. So we did you did a directed Commerce to do a feasibility on trying to enhance cheese sales. So this would be a feasibility analysis of, given the configuration of the industry at this point, where we have now a solid manufacturing base in the state. And I think, to Jackie's point, chances are you're better off expanding your existing capacity than you are building a new plant, but at least look at that first. And then second, is there some room for some additional capacity, which is certainly a lot of what we heard. You know, is there a possibility to create new capacity? And so I would propose that we try to shape up something for the next meeting that amounts to a feasibility analysis. And there's a lot of pieces to that that we can think about, including school lunch and new product possibilities. So
A lot of that needs to be done to get into the report anyhow, right?
yeah, I think that's a very good point. Yes.
You know, the report that we submit to the legislature needs that information that we assembled and to move, you know, to report to the legislature, and if they so desire, want to continue with something next year, they'd look at the report and measure where they want to go and how far. How are we doing, Randy?
27 after.
Any other quick things? Otherwise, we'll have to go through it. And
Could I just summarize basically what I've written down as the list of things that you want to see as potential recommendations in the
Sure.
report?
Yeah.
And it's in no particular order. It's just from my note taking. I'll probably read.
Can you guys hear okay there? Okay.
So first there was there's the broad issues of transportation, risk management, promotion, labor, purchasing, and then the constitutional analysis of basically funding for capacity building. So that work. So under transportation, there's the issue of broadening out the infrastructure to support driveways, water quality, bigger bull tanks, etc. There's the issue of hauling cost. Under risk management, there's the premiums for dairy margin coverage. There's the premiums for dairy revenue protection. There's concepts of rebates for past premiums and payment for future years for both programs. For the promotional category, there's Senator Brock's Vermont products tax at the distributor level to raise money for promotional purposes to promote Vermont products, most likely or preferentially through the Department of Marketing and Tourism. Then there is, and I'll skip over, there's the long-term taxing issue of milk for products, but that's going to drop down to the constitutional analysis. There's the BGS purchasing in the short term of local products, why they are not purchasing more Vermont local products. Get BGS in front of committees, get Rosie Krieger from AOE in front of committees on school lunches. Then there's the labor issue. What programs does the Department of Labor have that companies and farms can access to get CDLs, tie housing to labor availability, potentially school siting, and look into apprenticeship programs to bring labor into the state to support industry in the state. Then there's the issue of capacity building. But how are you going to build capacity without the funding to do it? Look at the long-term constitutional issues with potential assessment fee, et cetera, on the milk produced in the state.
The only thing, did you go over the issue of tying housing and labor in?
I did. I'm gonna need to get a little bit more support from people on how to do that.
But that's on your list.
That's on the list.
Okay, that's great, very good.
Yeah,
Very good.
sounds good. Anything else? Did you hear anything that Michael missed that you want to comment on? Jackie?
No, thank you, Senator. I think he got it all. I was tracking my list too. The question I had was, wasn't this report due the 15th of December? And did we get, I think Michael early on was going to ask for an extension. So when is this due now? And does that conflict with the feasibility study that we're looking at?
Well, yeah, there isn't a hurry on getting this in like on the 15th.
Okay,
We got an extension of that time,
okay.
okay?
Just
And
wanted to make sure.
But I think the feasibility is a proposal. We're making a proposal.
yeah,
to
we're
do
just
it.
proposing that.
Yeah.
We should have another meeting.
Yeah.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
Anybody got a calendar? Do you folks have your calendars in front of you, or do you know what? We should do another meeting within 2 weeks, get it out of the way before the holidays. Any particular day, Randy, do you have?
I've got my calendar here, but
So 2 weeks would be the 14th.
13th or 14th.
Yeah.
13th or 14th of December?
14th is open.
There's, on the 14th right now, there's the PES working group, I think, is meeting in the morning. So that would be a conflict for me.
13th?
On the 14th, the Tuesday, the 14th.
Yeah. How about the 13th?
I don't think I'm available on the 13th.
You are?
It'll be iffy. That's when we're trying to get home.
We got the 15th.
15th,
That works.
15th?
Sound like an auctioneer.
Going once,
Yeah.
going twice.
I mean, it doesn't work for me, but
Pardon?
15th is difficult for me too, I'm afraid. 14th, 15th are difficult.
we have,
What would work,
Trainings.
Heather?
I was just gonna say, I have trainings until 10. Our certified crop advisor trainings are that day.
That's not good for you, John, anyway, right?
Right.
Well, make it the
16th.
13th then, and if I can join, I'll join, and if not, I just won't be able to make it.
Can everybody make it on the 13th?
Yes.
Heather?
Yep.
John?
Yes.
Yeah. So why don't we plan on the 13th, and hopefully you can get connected up, Jackie.
Hopefully, yes.
Well, thank you very much. I know we worked over a half hour longer than we thought, but I think we're getting things shaped up well, and good working crew we got here.